Hey there, YouTubers. I spent some of the day at the PDX airport. Had a good time with old friends from Rome days. Amazing cat. Amazing cat. I didn't see the cat for real. This one needs to be rotated. What I'm going to talk about, though, is well, it doesn't really matter if the cat's rotated, but I think it would look better. It's an aesthetic judgment on my part. That's how it looked to me when I took the picture, is how it should I want to remember it. Anyway, I want to talk about esoteric history because why? Because I had a front row seat on some things and it would be no one's ever going to think to ask me the questions. Like if I wait for the interview where some perceptive person who's done infinite homework knows what to ask me, if I'm waiting for that day, it's never going to happen. So I should just tell my story and get it out there. So I won't always just tell it once because I don't know if I'll do it as well as I could. It's all about practice. But let's go back to Maurice Nicole and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky here. It's called Psychological Commentaries. I mention this here and there in my blogs and stuff. This book I haven't read. That my friend at the airport was reading that. I don't read Hungarian. I really admire Hungary and Hungarians, but I don't speak the language. I'm scared by all those accent marks. So one thing I was quite aware of, because why? Because at Princeton University, as I've mentioned, Walter Kaufmann, the famous translator of Nietzsche, philosopher in his own right, perhaps rather little known, and for good reason, because he, like many, was I don't know. He didn't like to kiss butt, let's put it that way. He was his own man. So people would criticize Kaufman because he'd go to Unification Church events or he'd go to like weirdo sort of marginalized events, kind of like going to North Korea today or something, and he'd get criticized for that. And he would always retort, well, you guys are no better kind of thing. Like you think they believe wacky stuff. What about you? What about your belief system? He was always, you know, kind of dismissive towards everybody's nonsense. I remember when I got there, his first kind of rant in our classroom was don't pretend you're a Christian if you haven't read the Bible in detail and a lot. If you're just like breezy knowledge of the Bible, you're not a Christian. Just give it up. Just give it up. Don't even pretend. Stuff like that. And same to Jewish people and so on. So he was, Torah and whatever your sacred texts are, if you're serious about your identity as X, Y, or Z, you've got to do the work to really earn that, or else just shut up. That's why I don't claim to be a fan of X, Y, or Z sometimes because I just know I haven't done enough homework. So even though I like X, Y, or Z and think they're cool so far, I haven't done enough homework to call myself a fan because that requires some study. Anyway, so Werner Erhard came out with this thing called the EST training. Him and his cronies, right? Him and his collaborators, his conspiracy, whatever. And Walter Kaufmann had done it one summer, and the following September, November, whatever, is when I sat in his house and listened to him talk. And, I was one of the invited students. I also had one on one time with a guy. But we didn't talk about Est, I don't recall. We talked about Wittgenstein and Marcuse and stuff. He thought I was a good writer, by the way. He liked my stuff and said so. Anyway, Kaufman liked the training, the S training, and you might want to know why. And I want to go back to this book, which is about, okay, so Nicole is a lot about, he calls it the work, and it's about our robotic side and our negative side. Kind of the same thing. If we're just stuck in negativity, define that broadly, that's kind of like robotic and we pay a huge price. And at the training, we were encouraged to sort of look at the price, what it cost us to be stuck in our robotic behavior. And getting off it was kind of jargon for not staying stuck in a position, regardless of what that position was. The ability to get off your position, whatever it was what the S training was cultivating. And it was kind of a fight against automaticity more than anything, which in the jargon of the training was connected to the mind, and being was what we were getting away from. As we disconnected from being, we became more and more robot. And that's a lot like the work, the way they talk, the way Maurice Nicole talks in these books. So to understand Erhard, what I'm suggesting, or his training, is I'm suggesting study Maurice Nicole, and it's kind of that. And then read other history about mind dynamics. And, there's a lot written about this stuff aside from my stuff. So that's not very, so far I haven't said anything you couldn't get just with a little bit of digging, I suppose. But then beyond that, Fuller and Erhard started to appear together and to be like on the stage together. And Applewhite, the CIA guy, career, by this time retired, early fan of Bucky though, like from young teenage years, he was into him. So as in his retirement, he gets to work with Bucky on synergetics and stuff. But he's very skeptical of this latest chapter, that Fuller would risk everything, it seemed like, to hang out with this cult leader who was getting a lot of negative press. What was that all about? Who was exploiting whom? Was Erhard being opportunistic, parasitic? And Applewhite wanted and needed to know that. And I was an Est guy, like I was volunteering by that point. And I had a fairly high opinion, like Kaufman, of the training. I mean, I could talk about what it was like for me, and then I went back and did mock trainings as a volunteer. I watched the whole thing. It was kind of like when I talk about Quakerism, how you should be able to see it from all angles, transparency and so on. I thought Center's Network was pretty good at that. It let me read manuals. Like, I got to be privy to a lot of what was going on there. I didn't feel like they were hugely occult or secretive about what was going on. And I think over time, Applewhite came to trust me more, that I wasn't, and he made clear to me on the other hand, that Fuller and Erhard had a pretty crisp relationship, pretty to the point. In other words, they split the door. In other words, if there was a admission, they were splitting it. What was important to Fuller, and this is a letter that I read to Erhard from Bucky, was that we not go with any we quickly debunk any press account that suggests that somehow Erhard was funding Fuller, because Fuller was a freestanding individual who was at the time saying good things about Werner Erhard at the time. And if it turned out that behind the scenes, well, he's just being paid, he's getting X amount of money directly from Erhard, and he's singing Erhard's praises, that's kind of shady, that's getting sketchy. And Fuller's all about integrity, and in integrity days, he later joins the board of the Hunger Project, which was about eliminating world hunger by the year 2000 and so forth. So Fuller was like, hey, Erhard, you need to make sure when you talk to these newspapers that you disabuse them of any foolish ideas that you're supporting me in any way, because we're in this 50-50 when we appear on stage. This is not about either of us financially underwriting the other, and so on. So I thought Fuller was pretty astute in seeing all these angles and stuff, and I was like, wow, I'm getting to see the insider business dealings, and that's pretty cool. And there's other stuff. I myself, because I was reading Synergetics, was concerned at how the mind, which is a pretty noble word, that we have a lot of eggs in that basket, was getting kind of denigrated in the S training as a philosophy. So I questioned the jargon itself, but that's, like I say, totally esoteric, right? It's like, that's so like, only a philosophy major from Princeton would like be concerned about that kind of crap, right? But it bothered me, and I communicated about that. And after a while, the S training went away, and it became the forum, which is a whole other chapter. And I've been to, friends of mine have gone through the forum, and I've gone and been at their graduation, but I myself have not gone through the forum. So anyway, that was pretty esoteric, I hope. Applewhite, Earhart, Bucky, you wouldn't hear it from anyone else, right? Exactly that story. And I don't think I may have that letter still somewhere, but maybe it's archived somewhere. I have some other things like that I got some letters from Bucky. I had some letters from Earhart's office, but where those are now, sometimes I'd photocopy and send them to people, but to who and when and so on. So I kind of diffuse myself throughout the cyberspace. I always wanted hypertext, and so it never occurred to me that I should write books. What I should do is use hyperlinks and link everything together. So I have tons of writing out there. I'm very accessible. And my name is unusual, so I'm easy to look up. But I don't have a lot of books out there with my name on the book because it seemed to me when the web came along and hypertext that this is how intelligent people will communicate now. We have graduated to a new level, so I've kind of taken that approach. Possibly a mistake, but we'll see. All right, hope that was interesting. Talk to you soon.